Right, welcome to our webinar. What we aim to do is to prevent our understanding at Amtri Veritas of what the future holds for manufacturers of machinery as the UK completes its departure from Europe. We are going to be introducing UKCA marking, and what I plan to do in this hour is to spend about 40 minutes or so, possibly a little bit longer, on going through what we think the issues are, and then to spend the rest of the time answering questions. What I've tried to do is incorporate the answers to questions that have been asked before the meeting into the presentation. But again, if you don't feel any previously submitted question has been answered to your satisfaction, please do ask it again through the meeting chat. So we're going to focus on what manufacturers need to do. I just want to introduce myself first, and secondly, Amtri Veritas. I'm Roland Taylor. I'm a senior compliance engineer at Amtri Veritas, and I've been working most recently on the actions that we need to put in place to be able to deal with UKCA marking. Unfortunately, as we go through, quite a lot of what I have to say is quite complicated, but you need to identify the parts of what I say that are relevant to you, because not everything that I'm talking about will be relevant to all manufacturers. I go back a long way with the machinery directive because I was helping companies make the transition from the previous regime to working within the supply of machinery safety regulations in the UK some 30 years ago. So I've got a long pedigree, if you like, with the machinery directive and compliance. Amtri Veritas is a notified body based in the UK, but we're a European notified body at the moment. As part of our preparation, we set up a subsidiary company in the Netherlands called Kuiper Certificering, and we've obtained European notified body status for that company in the Netherlands. And going forward, when we get to midnight on the 31st of December 2020, slight mistake on my slide, it's a year out. When we get to the end of this year, Amtri Veritas in the UK will transition into a UK approved body, and that will mean that we're set up with two companies, one a UK approved body and one an EU notified body in the same stable, under the same, well, not quite under the same roof, but pretty much so. So that's the preparation that we've been doing. The scope of what I'm going to talk about is machinery that falls within the scope of the Supply of Machinery Safety Regulations 2008. And at the moment, that's the same as the Machinery Directive. From the 1st of January next year, we will have two independent sets of legislation, one that applies in Europe, one that applies in the UK, but at least on the 1st of January, they will be identical with certain limits, which I'll come on to. I'm going to exclude certain things from what I have to say because I've arbitrarily decided that they're quite niche in application. I'm not going to talk about the full quality assurance compliance process, and that's mostly because we don't have any clients who use that route to compliance with the Machinery Directive. I'm not going to talk separately about partly completed machinery that's supplied with a declaration of incorporation. A lot of what I have to say will apply to it, but I'm not going to deal with it directly. And I'm not going to deal with any special arrangements for manufacturers who are based in Northern Ireland and the special conditions that apply to them. If you're a manufacturer outside Europe, and even if you're a manufacturer in Great Britain, you should assume that Northern Ireland is part of the UK, the European Union still, as regards compliance and supply CE mark product into it. I'm going to make some assumptions so that we can fit all this within an hour. The first assumption is that Brexit is a done deal and there's nothing left to be argued about over it. And so we're not going to answer any of those aspects during questions. I'm going to assume that you've already got an understanding of CE marking and that you're a manufacturer who is already CE marking machinery for the Machinery Directive and either supplying in the UK or supplying into Europe or both. And I'm going to assume that going forward, you've got a requirement to continue to supply machinery into the UK or the European Union or to both. So that's the assumptions I'm going to make, sets the context of what I've got to talk about. Some definitions, just to make sure we're all singing off the same hymn sheet. The Machinery Directive is the European directive with that number on the screen, which has been amended once or twice. The machinery regulations are the UK regulations that have transposed the Machinery Directive, and they're the Supply of Machinery Safety Regulations 2008 as amended. The amendments are important because the most recent amendment was the amendment that introduces UKCA marking. I'll come on to that in just a moment. A legal person is an individual or an entity such as a company who can carry a legal responsibility, and there are duties that have to be undertaken for both the directive and the regulations that have to be done by a legal person. The manufacturer is the legal person who designs and manufactures machinery. The manufacturer can, if he's outside of Europe, appoint an authorised representative. And an authorised representative is a legal person who's got a written mandate to carry out one or more of the duties of compliance with the Machinery Directive on behalf of the manufacturer. An authorised representative is not to be confused with the last item on that list, the person authorised to compile the technical file. That again is a legal person who holds or has access to the technical file so that it can be produced if it's requested by a national enforcement body. And if that person has to be identified on your declaration of conformity. If the manufacturer is based within Europe, then it's normally the manufacturer. If the manufacturer has appointed an authorised representative, which is entirely at his option, then it's quite often the authorised representative. It's only if you're a manufacturer not based in Europe and you don't have, and you've not appointed an authorised representative, that you need a separate person authorised to compile a technical file. The one that I haven't covered is the responsible person. That's a term in the UK regulations only, and it describes whoever it is has picked up the duties of compliance. So it is either the manufacturer himself, it is an authorised representative. If there is one, it can be an importer or it can be a distributor. In the UK, we use the term responsible person. Those are some definitions. They're going to come into what I've got to say further on. So what is UKCA marking? UKCA, United Kingdom Conformity Assessment, and it is virtually the same thing as CE marking. The differences are really down to terminology. Any reference to CE, to the European Community or to the European Union has been taken out and sometimes replaced with references to the UK. But references to directives now become references to the equivalent UK regulation. References to harmonised standards have been replaced by references to designated standards, and notified bodies are now going to be called approved bodies, and any notified body in the UK will automatically transition to being an approved body at midnight on the 31st of December. So those are the actual changes in the regulations, but the duties of compliance remain the same. The essential health and safety requirements remain the same. The standards, the harmonised standards, we're expecting to be identical with the designated standard, so they should remain the same. The compliance processes and the choices of the process, they all remain the same. A similar approach is taken to other sets of regulations that might apply to machinery, such as electromagnetic compatibility, outdoor noise, pressure equipment, ATEX, and so on. It's a similar sort of changes. But what you can tell from this is that the technical parts of compliance, at least on the 1st of January, will be the same for UKCA marking as for CE marking, but the changes are mostly administrative. So there is a change to the administration of compliance rather than the technical requirement for compliance. The 6 duties given both under the Machinery Directive and the UK supply regulations are these. The first duty is to ensure that the essential health and safety requirements are met, and you can do that either directly or by complying with a relevant harmonised standard. Those requirements stay the same, so that duty is unaffected. You have to ensure that the technical file has been put together and is available. That remains the same. Providing the necessary information, such as the instructions, that remains the same. But if you are supplying into 2 jurisdictions, the UK and Europe, you'll now have to have copies of 2 declarations of conformity in your instructions, one for Europe, one for the UK. The conformity assessment procedures remain the same, but to supply into the UK, you'll be using an approved body in the UK. Supplying to Europe, you'll be using a European notified body, if that's appropriate for you. And we'll talk this through in a bit more detail. You still have the duty of drawing up a declaration of conformity, and you'll need one for the UK and one for Europe, and affix the marking. And the marking for UKCA is now different. You've probably seen the logo, but we don't see any reason why you can't put both marks on one manufacturer's plate. So again, the changes are really in the administrative parts of compliance rather than in the technical requirement. I want to reassure you that UKCA marking is in no way retrospective. So up to the end of this year, up to the 31st of December 2020, supplying into the UK has been with machinery that is CE marked, and the same in Europe. After the end of this year, or 12 months, if you're supplying into the UK, you can continue to supply CE marked machinery next year. Or you can start to use UKCA marking, or of course you can do both. You can use dual marking. And then after the end of next year, after the 31st of December 2021, for the UK, you will have to use UKCA or dual marking. So next year, UKCA marking becomes optional, and the following year it becomes mandatory. For supplying to Europe, CE marking simply continues, except that if you're producing Annex 4 machinery or machinery that's in Part 4 of the regulations, they're the same thing, you need to switch from a UK notified body, if you use one, to a European notified body. Again, we will highlight this in just a moment. So if you produce a one-off machine, or if you have produced a one-off machine and you've supplied it and it's been CE marked, that's fine. The transition affects people who are either going to supply one-off machinery in the future, or manufacturers who are involved in series production, where they've been making instances of machinery that's CE marked over a period of time, and that time stretches past the end of this year. So machines that you supply in the future may well need their marking changed. The if you like, the general changes that are common to all sorts of machines, no matter what the compliance process is. One relates to the authorised representative. If you're a manufacturer outside of Europe and you have chosen to appoint an authorised representative, then you will need to end up with one in each jurisdiction that you supply into. If you've got an authorised representative appointed in the UK, then after the end of this year, an authorised representative in the UK will not be able to carry out the duties in Europe for the CE market. You'll need to appoint an extra one in Europe, and vice versa. If you've got an authorised representative appointed in Europe, and you intend to supply into the UK after the end of the year, then you need a UK authorised representative, one in each jurisdiction. And the same applies to the person authorised to compile the technical file. If you're a manufacturer outside Europe, apologise, I've been on mute. It may have happened remotely. Can somebody tell me when they lost me, and I'll go back?
Yeah, it was only like a minute ago.
If I go back,
no, you were just talking about the technical file and how you have to have a separate appointed person for UK and EC. Then, so just
fine. Right, you need a person in each jurisdiction for the person authorised to compile the technical file. The only oddity about this is that in the UK regulations, they've been amended without that condition for UKCA marking, which is a bit odd. We think that that is an omission in the regulations because it doesn't make sense if you're supplying a machine into the UK and the person authorised to compile the technical file is outside the UK, because it could be anywhere in the world. So we think there's an omission, and we think that's going to get corrected. So we're strongly advising manufacturers to make sure they've got somebody in the UK for the UK market and somebody in Europe for the European market. However, there's a complication which is coming up next year for people supplying into Europe. And the complication which is
sorry, we're just issues with keeping our mic off mute.
I think we're all right. It's only cut out briefly. This complication is the market surveillance regulations, and it comes into force in Europe in July next year. And although it doesn't amend the machinery directive, it does mean that if you're supplying machinery into Europe from outside, you need to supply through an economic operator. And an economic operator is either, if you're in Europe yourself, the manufacturer. If you're not in Europe, it's either an importer or an authorized representative or a fulfillment service provider. And the definition of that is in the new regulation. But it can mean that if you've chosen to deal with your compliance yourself as a manufacturer and you have a person authorized to compile the technical file, that person authorized to compile the technical file effectively acquires extra duties. If you're supplying through an importer or an authorized representative, you can add those duties to that person. But it may mean, if you don't have either one of those, that you as a manufacturer need to appoint an authorized representative in Europe, not to do any duties of compliance under the machinery directive, but to meet your new obligations under the market surveillance regulation. And if you're going to do that, you must give the authorised representative a written mandate. So that is a complication that is coming down the track and is going to arrive on the 16th of July next year. Now, I want to talk about how you work out what you need, what action you need to take for your machinery. And I'm going to present a couple of decision trees, and I've used some abbreviations in them. NB stands for notified body. After the end of this year, there will only ever be European notified bodies. ABs are approved bodies, and that's what we're all on. Amtri Veritas is a notified body, and our other notified bodies are going to turn into at the end of the year. TF is a technical file. AR is an authorised representative. Again, I stress that that is optional. You appoint one if you're a manufacturer outside Europe, if you wish to delegate some of your compliance obligation, and there's that extra complication next year in the market surveillance regulation. A TEC is a type examination certificate. That is something that is needed from a notified body for the most common compliance process, putting machinery on the market in Europe and subsequently in the UK. The VOC is a declaration of conformity. The CE mark looks like that, and the UKCA mark looks like that. The decision trees, there are two of them. This is the simple one, and I've put them in because these are the way in which you identify the actions that you need to take. Life is simplest if you produce, if you manufacture non-Annex 4 machinery. If you supply non-Annex 4 machinery into the UK, regardless of whether you're a UK manufacturer, a European manufacturer, or a rest of the world manufacturer, then there is nothing that you need to worry about, particularly before the end of the year, because you can continue to supply CE mark machinery into the UK market for a further 12 months. Before the end of that further 12 months, if you're using a European authorised representative, then and you want to use the same approach in the UK, you need to appoint a UK-based authorised representative and a person to hold the technical file. You need to find those in the UK. Then you need to draw up a separate declaration of conformity for UKCA marking and put on the UKCA mark. You've got an extra 12 months to do that. The UKCA mark initially can be temporary. So you can equip yourself with a reel of UKCA stickers and go around your warehouse and stick those on. By the end of 2023, that has to become a permanent feature of the marketplace. There's a little bit of allowance for machinery in stock. If you're supplying non-Annex 4 machinery into Europe, and of course you may do both, in which case you get both sets of action. Before the end of this year, if you're using an authorised representative, you need to find one in Europe to do the same duties, but that is your choice to use an authorised representative. And you need to find somebody in Europe to hold the technical file, if you haven't already got one. And then you need to, because you may have made changes to your authorised representative and to your person authorised to compile a technical file, if you have, there will be corresponding updates to your declaration of conformity, and you continue to affix the CE mark. So there may be very little to do on either route. But those are the choices for non-Annex 4 machinery. And life starts to get complicated now for Annex 4 machinery, because there are more choices. And again, for the products that you manufacture and supply, you need to follow this decision tree to identify the action. The content of this is available on the BEIS website. You can find it on Google by searching for BEIS, the government department producing this material, and UKCA marking. So if you're producing Annex 4 machinery, let's go to the left first. And if you're if you have a type examination certificate from a UK-based notified body, and if you're supplying into the UK, you get an extra 12 months. And in those extra 12 months, you can start when you like, but you must finish before the end of next year. First, you've got to get your UK-based notified body, which has automatically become an approved body, to make sure you've got a UK type examination certificate. And that should be a relatively easy process, because we believe that notified bodies will carry their certifications across when they become approved bodies. So that should be a fairly straightforward process. If you have an authorised representative and they're unfortunately based in Europe, you'll need to appoint a UK one, and you'll need to find somebody in the UK who's the person authorised to compile a technical file. You'll have to draw up a UK declaration of conformity, and we'll look at that in just a moment. And you will have to put on the new UKCA mark, and initially you can put that on as a temporary provision. If you're, we'll take the next branch now, where you're using a UK-based notified body and they've given you an EC type examination certificate. If you want to continue to supply into the EU, unfortunately, your type examination certificate from a UK notified body will become invalid at midnight on the 31st of December this year. And it becomes a matter of urgency for you to enter into a contract with a European notified body, for that European notified body to issue you a European type examination certificate that you can then use going forward from the 1st of January next year. Because you won't be able to put machines on the market in the EU if you're still holding a type examination certificate issued by a UK notified body. And this is where you'll be running out of time. Again, before the end of the year, if you have appointed an authorised representative and he happens to be based in the UK, you'll need to make an appointment in the European member state, and you'll have to find a person authorised to compile a technical file as well. You'll have to update your declaration of conformity because you may have changed authorised representative. You will certainly have changed notified body, so you need the new notified body information. You may have changed the person authorised on the technical file. You update your declaration of conformity, and you continue to put the CE mark on. And all that has to be done between now and the end of the year. If, however, you're a manufacturer who supplies Annex 4 machinery and you have a type examination certificate from a European-based notified body, up to the European member state, then you have all that work to do, but an extra 12 months to do it in. So if you're intending to supply into the UK, you need to enter into a contract with a UK approved body. You need to get a UK type examination certificate from that body, and that is potentially more than just an administrative exercise. All the accreditation standards to which the approved bodies and notified bodies work to, unfortunately, don't address this sort of mirroring of certification. It's a process that appears to have to be made up as we go along. So that's the second one. Then there's exactly the same issues with authorised representative and person required to hold a technical file. If you use the former and he is set up in Europe, you need to find a UK one. And similarly for the person authorised to hold a technical file. You'll then need to issue a new UK declaration of conformity and be putting on the UKCA mark. The last set of actions is for manufacturers of Annex 4 machinery who have a type examination certificate from the UK a European-based notified body, and who want to continue to supply into Europe after the end of this year. The only thing that you need to be worried about is that if you use an authorised representative, that he is based in Europe, and the person who is authorised to compile a technical file is also in Europe. If you've made any changes, you'll have a declaration of conformity update, but you continue to affix the email. So it's important to work out which set of actions apply to you. Just a word about product that is in the supply chain during either the transition at the end of this year or the transition at the end of next year. Stock, that is machinery that you've manufactured and you've got sitting in a warehouse waiting for people to purchase, does not count as machinery in the supply chain. To be in the supply chain, it needs to be machinery that has been ordered and manufactured, but not yet supplied, not yet shipped, or in the process of shipping. It does not count as, or stock weight that is waiting for orders does not count as product in the supply chain. And product in the supply chain may be supplied as it is, even if it's past the deadline. So if you've got it manufactured, it's waiting to be shipped, or it's in transit, then if it arrives, if it's Annex 4 machinery, it's got a type examination certificate from a UK-based notified body, still supply it if it is genuinely in the supply chain. And the other just point to stress there is that for UKCA marking, you can use a temporary marking up until the end of 2023. So the actions can be simplified. If you've worked out where you are using those decision trees, if you're supplying into Europe after the end of this year, if you're Annex 4, you'll need to have a contract with a European notified body if you don't already have one. You'll need to make sure that you've got a valid type examination certificate issued by your European notified body. If you use an authorised representative, then you need to make sure that he is based in Europe, and also the person authorised to compile the technical file. Although the complication with that is that in July, the market surveillance regulations kick in and change the duties of that person. And then you must make sure that the declaration of conformity that you're using for machines supplied into Europe accurately reflect all those changes. If you're supplying to the UK, if you are supplying Annex 4 machinery, then you must have a contract with a UK-based approved body. We think the transition from UK-based notified bodies is going to happen automatically there. Your UK-based approved body, if you've got Annex 4 machinery, will need to issue you with a UK type examination certificate, but you've got that extra year to sort that out. If you're using an authorised representative, then you must have a UK-based one, and the same holds for the person who's authorised to compile a technical file. You need to create a new United Kingdom Declaration of Conformity and apply the new marking. So the actions simplify quite a lot. You need to work out which set you need to follow and by what deadline you need to follow them by. We've talked about the changes being administrative. Here is an example of a EC declaration of conformity for product that is being supplied into Europe. We've made it a declaration for an Annex 4 machine. There has to be the business name and address of the manufacturer. And there's a business name and address conveniently just around the corner from us at Amtri Veritas. This manufacturer has not chosen to have an authorised representative, and again, it is his choice. But he has had to hurriedly find somebody in Europe who can be the person authorised to compile the technical file. And I suspect he's chosen his nephew as a quick fix. So going forward, for machines supplied from the UK or from outside Europe, you need that technical file holder. The description and the identification of the machinery doesn't change. The sentence declaring that all the relevant provisions of the directive are fulfilled doesn't change. The notified body information may have to, if this manufacturer was using a UK notified body, after the end of the year, he will have to switch to a European notified body, and he will have to quote that body's information plus that body's type examination certificate. The references to harmonised standards or other standards used won't change. He's quoted some standards, but he's not used any other technical standards and specifications. The place and date of declaration remain the same, and the identity and signature of the person authorised to sign remain the same. So the changes that he may have had to deal with are person authorised to compile the technical file in Europe, and to make sure that he's been using a European-based notified body. A UK declaration of conformity will look something like this. It still needs the business name and address of the manufacturer, but the manufacturer has not appointed an authorised representative, so there's nothing to put on for that. He needs to have the name and address of the person authorised to compile a technical file in the UK. But as he's a manufacturer based in the UK, he's making the assumption on the certificate, not unreasonable in my opinion, that he as the manufacturer is that person. The description and identification of the machinery remains the same. The sentence declaring all the relevant provisions now has to declare that all the relevant provisions of the regulations are fulfilled. So that sentence becomes, this machinery fulfills all the relevant provisions of the Supply of Machinery Safety Regulation 2008 as amended. And we are suggesting that as an adequate sentence. Because this is a UK declaration of conformity for supplying machinery in the UK, his notified body needs to be a UK, or needs to, the approved body needs to be a UK approved body. And he's got that. And he needs to have a UK type examination certificate and quote that number on the declaration. 7, references now are to designated standard. And what we expect is that our list of designated standards will be the same as Europe's list of harmonised standards. The difference will be is that when we reference a designated standard, it will have a British Standards prefix, BF, and it will be the same numbers and the same standard. BEIS have not yet published their list of designated standards. That's on their to-do list for between now and the end of December. And we're very much hoping that there are not going to be any surprises in that list. So 8, no other technical standards and specifications have been used, so there's nothing there. The place and date of declaration remains the same, and the identity and signature of the person authorised to sign remains the same. So that is an illustration of the difference between the two types of declaration. The marking, Amtri Veritas is recommending that you have 2 declarations for 2 jurisdictions, an EC declaration of conformity for Europe and a UK declaration of conformity for the UK. It may be possible to produce a document that contains everything for both jurisdictions. We're not ruling that out, but we recommend the other. We also recommend that you aim for a combined or a dual marking. It's exactly the same information as before on the CE plate, just with the UKCA marking added. And again, for a couple of years, that can be a temporary mark, a sticker, rather than a chain nameplate. So that's nearly all that I've got to say. I do just want to highlight some of the remaining uncertainties, because these are things that you'll need to monitor going forward. Whether or not we get any last-minute changes from the negotiations that are currently happening, we just don't know. We're not expecting any, but it may happen. We know that there are some, well, let's be polite and call them omissions in the UK regulation, such as the omission of the stipulation that the person authorised to compile the technical file doesn't have to be resident in the UK. If he's not resident in the UK, then he's outside UK jurisdiction, and the HSC, the enforcement body, would have no legal means of getting hold of the technical file, and that seems a nonsense. So we think there are going to have to be some amendment fairly quickly. As I mentioned, the list of designated standards is not yet published. We very much hope it will be identical to the list of harmonised standards at least at the beginning. But there is an issue about future changes in standard, and in particular, synchronisation between harmonised standard status in Europe and designated status in the UK. When a new standard or an updated standard is produced, the harmonisation process in Europe requires representatives of member states to agree that it can be harmonised. In the UK, only the UK has to agree with itself. So it's quite possible that standards get designated before they get harmonised, or possibly vice versa. We don't know, and manufacturers, depending on a standard or a presumption of conformity, you will need to track this. Hopefully, it will go smoothly. Another thing to worry about is that we're expecting an update to the machinery directive in 2021. When it comes, it will probably have something like a 2-year implementation window, but we don't know what we're going to do in the UK should that happen. One of the changes we're expecting is some extra categories of machinery to be added to Annex 4. It's only an expectation at that stage, but one of the consequences of that could mean a difference between the Annex 4 list in Europe and the equivalent list in the UK, and that will make life complicated. And the last thing, which is still unclear, is that if you're interpreting the machinery directive, there is an official guide that you can turn to, and as far as we know, that official guide has no status for UKCA marking. Whether we're going to have an equivalent guide, whether there is going to be some means of still referring to it, we don't know, but the status is still up in the air. So that's all I've had to say. We're 3/4 of the way through our hour, and if anybody's been asking questions, then we will try to answer them. What I suggest we do is that we answer the questions from the chat, and if we answer your question and you want a follow-up, then unmute yourself and by all means answer that follow-up. Okay, Tim, do you want to take us through the question?
Yep, so first question, Jim's asked if the economic operator can be a sales division of the UK manufacturer with an operation in the Netherlands. Our understanding is that yes. The new requirements which are coming in Europe in the market surveillance directive in summer next year will mean that your sales division in the Netherlands will count as an economic operator. So hopefully that one was answered. Jim again has asked, is the technical file held internally or do we need to appoint an external body? So this again is if you are you're currently a UK manufacturer and you are supplying into Europe, you will need to have either an authorized or a person authorised to compile the technical file, and from summer next year, or an economic operator to keep the file for you. If you are a manufacturer already cited in the EU, you can keep your technical file internal unless you're manufacturing Annex 4 machinery, in which case you can take an EC type examination.
I just add the requirements of somebody authorised to compile the technical file are effectively not changing. The only thing you have to make sure is that you've got somebody with that responsibility in the appropriate jurisdiction, either the UK or in Europe. That person carries the responsibility of being able to provide the technical file to an enforcement body should they make a reasoned request for it. If it's a third party, it's probably in their interest to hold it actually on their premises. If they're part of your company, a subsidiary or a branch of the company in Europe or the UK, then it may simply be sufficient for them to be able to ask you to provide it should it ever be asked for. But there is no reason why a technical file actually has to be physically held in Europe, so long as it can be made available on demand.
Richard Banks has asked, can the economic operator also be an authorised representative? Yes.
Yes, but there will be differences in duties. An authorised representative under the Machinery Directive will be carrying out one or more of your duties of compliance under the Machinery Directive. For the market surveillance regulations, you can use that same authorised representative, but he will acquire more duties under those new regulations.
Lord, that's what happens with Ireland's notified body UKCA, CMI can be done by the same body.
I've specifically not addressed that because the situation is. Sorry, what happens with Ireland? It depends which bit of Ireland. If it's an Irish notified body, that counts as a European notified body. If it's a Northern Ireland-based notified body, life becomes very complicated, and you'd need to submit that by email for us to try and either answer it or steer you in the right direction. But as far as we know, you cannot have the same. The same organisation cannot be both an approved or a notified body. You would have to have two companies, one set up in Europe, one set up in the UK. Of course, Ireland counts as the Republic of Ireland, part of Europe.
Maria, what the process to have the UK importer appointed as a responsible person for UK regulation? So it's not being massively defined by what it's saying is basically what we need to enlighten that.
If you're going to use a UK importer, and an importer can carry out some of the duties of compliance, it's probably best to explicitly appoint them as an authorised representative with a written mandate which explains which of the duties they're going to carry out. But an importer is someone who can carry out duties. If we haven't answered that to your satisfaction, please send in an email and we'll try and
flesh it out a little bit.
Yeah.
Can the CE mark and UKCA mark be displayed on the same machine nameplate? Also, can a UK DFC and a European DFC be supplied as standard in a combined CE and UKCA technical file, or do the technical files need to be completely separate copies? So I think this question was asked just for Roland's last couple of slides. So yes, you can do those things. Amtri Veritas' position is that you should produce a separate UKCA declaration of conformity and a EC declaration of conformity, but there's nothing stopping manufacturers putting both marks on the same nameplate on the machine. Throughout next year, you can put the UKCA mark as a sticker, and it's only in 2023 does that have to become indelible and permanent on the machine.
Yeah, I think the main thing is that you still can manage with just one technical file, so long as it covers the requirements of both jurisdictions. So it will need copies of 2 declarations of conformity in it. You may have to have dual copies of lists of standards, because the actual name of references of designated standards and harmonized standards will be slightly different.
Yeah,
but I think is a fairly trivial thing.
Richard Banks has asked, how does the process work for self-declared products from a UK manufacturer pre and post 31st of December 2020? So UK manufacturers will, if they are supplying into the EU, will have to nominate either an authorised representative or a person authorised to compile a technical file, and they must be cited within an EU member state. And that is so that if an national enforcement authority requests a technical file, they've got a route to getting their hands on it.
Yeah, if you're not using an authorised representative, you can continue that way. You don't need to appoint one. At least not until the market surveillance regulations kick in and life gets complicated. So you can supply it in exactly the same way. The only issue for you will be that your person authorised to compile a technical file, if they're currently in the UK, you need to find somebody in Europe to fulfil that duty. Yes, I should say that Amtri Veritas' subsidiary company, Kuiper Certificering, is offering exactly that service.
So Jim has asked, do companies like 2-for-1 notify body service for UK and EU combined? So simple answer, yes. And if you have any inquiries, please just get in touch and email them. And yeah, but that is a service we can offer because of our subsidiary Kuiper Certificering. How does the appointed person compiling a technical file have to have any specific qualification or certification, other than being nominated by the manufacturer?
Now, let's be very careful here. If we're talking about a person in a company who puts the technical file together on behalf of the manufacturer, then no. If you are identified on a declaration of conformity as the person authorised to compile the technical file, it doesn't mean you're involved or have duties in putting the technical file together. It means you have a duty to provide the technical file on demand to a national authority who has a reason for asking for it. So there are possibly 2 things that question relates to.
If you have an authorised representative, do you need to list the name and address of the authorised representative on the declaration form of the authorised representative person's name? So I think this was asked before one of Roland's later slides. But if we can go back to the examples, and I think because we have to list the name and address as well, just the name won't.
Well, he doesn't have any authorised representative. So yes, it must be the business name and full address of the authorised representative on the declaration of conformity.
Jane has asked, does the SMSR cover what would have been covered by ATEC and low voltage directive, etc.?
The answer is the supply of machinery safety regulations has the same scope as the machinery directive, but there are equivalent changes in and things like the low voltage directive in ATEC, they have been changed for UKCA marking in exactly the same way. If a compliance process for regulations like ATEX or, for example, the pressure equipment directive, if your compliance process uses a notified body, then the changes to notified bodies apply exactly in the same way.
Okay, and then finally, question for Ron. HMRC defines Great Britain as Scotland, Wales, and England. It states that approved bodies cannot certify the EU. That is correct. However, Ireland bodies can do both.
I think that will be Northern Ireland.
Northern Ireland
notified bodies. That may be correct, but this is one of the reasons I've excluded discussing Northern Ireland in this webinar, because it's an order of magnitude more complicated than the arrangement. That may be true. A Northern Ireland notified body may be able to do both, but I would have to confirm that. If that is an issue, just drop us an email and we'll do a bit of digging.
Okay, so that was all the questions asked in the chat. We will put, I think before we upload the presentation, we will put a section on the end where we answer these questions maybe a bit more fully, just because on the fly, we don't want to miss details and send them on that. So we'll just double check what we said and put formal response as well. So yeah, thanks for attending. Hope it's been useful, and you will receive an email when we have uploaded the presentation. So yeah, thanks a lot. And if you have anything else that you need from us, I'm going to be online for another 5-10 minutes. So just put any more questions in the chat. But thanks a lot.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Roland, sorry, just to clarify that point on the self-declared part, you said that you can use an authorised rep, but you don't need to, such there's another route. I kind of missed that bit, the second part of it, sorry.
I'm not quite sure which bit of what I said you're referencing. As a manufacturer, you don't have to use an authorised representative. That's down to your choice. It allows a manufacturer outside of Europe or the UK to delegate some of the compliance responsibilities. If you choose to do it, you have to have a written mandate. If you don't choose to do it, no problem.
Sorry, someone else came in and the mic went big.
So the choice of authorised representative, whether or not you have one, doesn't change. If you've got one, you've got to make sure that you've got one in each jurisdiction that you need one in.
So if you had a self-declared person, as long as you've got either an importer or someone that in that jurisdiction that they can go to under their laws and regulations, that covers it.
Well, there are two things. One is you've got to have somebody nominated in Europe to, the wording is to compile your technical file. It's the go-to person in case there's a compliance issue and an enforcement body to your technical file. There has to be somebody on the declaration nominated. If you're a European manufacturer, you can do that yourself. If you happen to have an authorised representative, the authorised representative can do it. But if you're not in Europe and you don't have an authorised representative, you've got to have that extra person with that responsibility. And again, the responsibility is simply to produce the technical file if it's ever asked for. And that person has to be confident that they will be able to get the technical file from you if it's ever asked for.
Okay, thank you.